This is the greatest Frankie theory ever, allegedly. That's the title of a video by Civ Retcon on the YouTube, and honestly, I kinda agree. This is definitely one of the best Frankie ideas that I've ever heard, which involves combining the inherited will of Tom with the skills and technology of Dr. Vegapunk to play an absolutely integral role in the future dawn of the world. And the only man-thing who can make all of this happen is Frankie. So there'll be a link to the original video in the description, but this is my take on the greatest Frankie theory ever. Firstly, as much as Egghead Island chose not to dwell on this or really reference it at all, Frankie has a deep connection to Dr. Vegapunk. And throughout the series, Frankie has been carrying out Vegapunk's inherited will in much the same way that he's been carrying out Tom's. When it really, truly, honestly comes down to it, Frankie is more of a scientist than he is a shipwright. He's a scientist who applies his skills to shipbuilding. And he even calls himself that, which we'll see in a bit. But this is something that Oda has very much had in mind all of the time. In fact, one of my favorite things that Oda has ever done is draw the good and bad timeline future Straw Hats, because the good timeline versions reveal what's truly important to each of these characters. And in Frankie's case, at age 50, he's on a winter island, and he's offering to add a heating system to said island, which was Vegapunk's idea and an ambition that he could not complete, at least not on his homeland. During the time skip, Frankie was sent to the birthplace of Dr. Vegapunk, Karakuri Island, not to be confused with the non-canon Karakuri Island, which was the setting of One Piece Movie 7, and to increase the potential confusion, it also goes by a second name being the future country Baltimore. However, this is an island that we'd already seen long before in NL's cover story. This was the home of Dr. Tsukimi, who made Lieutenant Spacey and his comrades Cosmo, Galaxy, and Macro. However, I only point this out because it's slightly inconsistent, as Karakuri here is clearly not a winter island. We see quite a bit of it, and there is not a flake of snow to be found. So here is an idea. We don't actually know when the Spacey flashbacks take place in this cover story. All we know is that NL finds Spacey and they stumble upon what is described as a, quote, old battlefield, which we discover on the cover of chapter 437, Naked Mania, which is the chapter where Robin grabs Frankie's balls. So the Spacey flashback could have taken place before Vegapunk was even born. Perhaps during a time when Karakuri Island was normal and very not winter-y, and then, oh no, some phenomena happened to transform it into a winter island. And that's why Vegapunk was so determined to build a heating system, because this wasn't a natural winter island and its residents were suffering under brutal climate change. Although I should say it's infinitely more likely that this is just a little artistic inconsistency, because Spacey then remembers fighting against the space pirates, so it must have happened pretty much at the same time, but it was a cool idea for about a second. In any case, Frankie is sent to Karakuri Island during the 2-year time skip, and he encountered a weird mountain that, as it turns out, Vegapunk built as a child. It was intended to be a geothermal heating system for the entire island, however, it was never finished. There were two big problems that prevented its completion. One was that Vegapunk's ideas were impossible to implement with modern day technology. Well, modern day back then, past technology? Although modern day still now couldn't do things. It couldn't be done with the stuff we had. And the second is that Vegapunk lacked the funding to develop this technology himself. However, this is something that Vegapunk would go on to sort of implement on Egghead Island. It had a system known as the Island AC, which could control the climate of the entire island, which transformed Egghead from a winter island to a tropical climate. The kind of island that Karakuri actually was initially in NL's cover story before becoming a winter island somehow. For whatever reason, Dr. Vegapunk never saw fit to grace his homeland with this technology. Karakuri is still a blizzardy hell, but it's probably because the world government wouldn't have paid for it even if he tried. However, Frankie was empathetic with the residents of Karakuri Island to the point of tears. And when Frankie empathizes with someone's cause, he does everything he can to champion it, like Robin and Enies Lobby or the Tontada tribe on Dressrosa. And very interestingly, during his time on Karakuri Island, this is where Frankie referred to himself as a scientist. While Frankie was in Vegapunk's lab, he said, "As a scientist, I don't want to wreck any of his stuff." He said this immediately before he pressed the self-destruct button, mistaking it for a pirate symbol, in a very comical callback to Chopper's tragic mushroom situation. But Oda is essentially saying that Frankie's future, at least partially, carries on Vegapunk's inherited will. The way he's speaking at age 50 implies that he's on a new island, not Karakuri, and that he finds it too cold, so he offers to install heating for the residents. Which to me would imply that he's already gone and done the same thing for Karakuri Island, because again, he was very empathetic to their situation. He has not forgotten. And then at age 70, Frankie even adopts the Egghead Hawaiian shirt aesthetic, or more accurately, Egghead Island borrowed the Hawaiian shirt aesthetic from Frankie, because this future was published a year before the Straw Hats even set foot on the island, and of course Frankie has always been a proud supporter of flashy palm trees on clothing. There's a lot of very natural integration between Frankie and Vegapunk. Frankie takes Vegapunk's technology technology, Vegapunk takes Franky's fashion. And honestly, they're a much more natural pair than, say, Franky and Tom. And whether you enjoy this idea or not, I do think it would make a lot of sense if Franky was the son of Queen, which is an idea so outrageous but ever so potentially true that you should absolutely check out the full video I did on it. But it would be quite fitting for Queen's child to inherit the will of someone so ideologically opposed to him, much like Sanji, also a child of a Mads member, who inherited the will of a cook, something that Vince Smoke Judge adamantly insisted that Sanji could never lower himself to being. Franky also has a very particular set of skills that he's acquired over a very long career, skills which make him a dream for the future of mankind. In chapter 1062, Atlas gets very angry about the food replicators, stating that they didn't have enough technicians to mass produce them. She goes on to state that it's the same for the island AC function and of pretty much everything on the island. It's not just a funding issue. You can have all of the money in the world, but we also have a skill shortage. It is a labor issue. Right now, or at least back then when we still had control of everything, the Vegapunks possess the materials to mass produce at least the food replicators. And so there's a very envious potential in the One Piece world to nigh on eradicate world hunger. But there aren't enough people with a skill level high enough to actually build them. And to that I say, enter Franky, who has modeled all of his post-time skip abilities on Vegapunk's plans, and has proved himself to be more than skilled enough to follow these plans to perfection. But we're getting a bit ahead of ourselves here. We really shouldn't assign someone else's will to Franky without first examining his own dream. Franky's dream is to, of course, build a ship that can circumnavigate the globe, which in theory he's already done. It's one of those time delay dreams that we're eagerly waiting to tick off when all the conditions are met, with the only issue being that the Thousand Sunny actually needs to do the thing, and that's why Franky is accompanying it, to be able to maintain it and celebrate it the day it becomes the Ship of Dreams. Franky refers to the Thousand Sunny as the Ship of Dreams. However, Franky is a bit of a unique case dream-wise, because he's also said that Luffy is the only person capable of turning the Thousand Sunny into a Ship of Dreams. Franky said this whilst wearing a tiger skin which he accidentally set on fire, and then ran through the island to put out, thus creating an incident that would be remembered as the legend of Baldamore's Burning Beast. Incident aside, Franky has given up a huge locus of control here. At the moment, Franky's dream is more reliant on Luffy. He's entrusted Luffy with his dream, as the only man who can captain this vessel and turn it into the Ship of Dreams. However, to some degree, I think that's true of the rest of the crew as well. Nami is the only person who can navigate to Franky's dream, Jinbei is the only person who can steer it, and Zoro is the only person who can be asleep the entire time, and I guess make Sunny a literal Ship of Dreams. It's much more of a group effort than most Straw Hat dreams, which means that Franky has a bit more open space in his dream inventory than the rest of the crew do. And Franky may very well choose to follow in the path of Tom, who built the Oro Jackson, vessel of Goldie Roger, Pirate King Extraordinaire, and the first known person to successfully sail around the world. And doing so was a source of great pride for Tom, but that wasn't the end of his ambition or his purpose. In a very similar maneuver, Tom entrusted that ship to Roger, just like how Franky is entrusting his dream to Luffy. Franky's just a bit more hands-on about it than Tom was, and Tom also had a much greater dream behind that, with the final act of his life being to connect Water 7 to the outside world. You see, thanks to all of this flooding caused by those nasty ancient weapons, Water 7 is much more isolated and in much more danger than most of the world. And the island was on the verge of anarchy because it had no way of sustaining itself. And so Tom invented the concept of a sea train that would allow fast and safe travel to other islands, which revolutionized Water 7's economy and has now allowed it to become one of the more pleasant islands to live on in the Grand Line, all because of its connection to other islands. And so Water 7 is a small-scale example of what we're trying to do with the One Piece world as a whole. We are trying to reconnect everyone, and then something eternal happiness maybe. But during the 2-year time skip, Iceberg followed in the tracks of Tom as well, and not only developed the idea to turn all of Water 7 into a ship in order to ensure its safety and prosperity, but he also built another sea train to further connect Water 7 known as the Puffing Ice, which is the spiritual successor to the original Puffing Tom. And just another fun fact about the Puffing Ice that I don't think will ever find its way into another video. In One Piece Stampede, the Puffing Ice makes an appearance crossing Delta Island, and it's carrying a bunch of filler and movie characters as its passengers. For example, in one window you can see Zhao, the little girl from Strongworld, with R-Piece from the Warship Island arc. But look, if we keep this trend going with the Puffing Tom and the Puffing Ice, then I think it would be really cool to see a Puffing Franky in the future. Except this could be a much larger scale project. Inspired by Tom and empowered by Vegapunk, Franky could aim to connect the entire world via clouds and a sky train or even a series of sky ships that can go back and forth. Because the sea trains are great, but they have their obvious limitations. In the sea, you can't even go into the sea, they can only be on top of it. And building a sky train, it might seem like a bit of a jump, but the Straw Hats have already demonstrated the seed of this idea. When the crew arrived at Punk Hazard, a group of them then took the Mini Mary onto the island thanks to a milky road created by Nami, which she learned from Witheria. And just look at the two reactions that Oda decides to show to this ability. One is Luffy and the other is Franky, who is absolutely gobsmacked. This moment here could be the inception of an idea. We see two locations bridged by clouds, and wouldn't it be great if the whole world could be connected like that? I also think it's a natural evolution of the idea of the Thousand Sunny as well, which can already temporarily fly after guzzling some delicious cola. But when I think about a ship named the Thousand Sunny carrying the sun god to enact the dawn of the world, it becomes clear that this vessel simply belongs in the sky. Now, Nami's Milky Road can unfortunately only create temporary clouds. However, Vegapunk figured out how to create permaclouds, and also a whole series of vehicles that operate via cloud technology. Clouds are this stupidly important and probably his biggest and most versatile technological breakthrough, and Vegapunk would agree with this assessment. The most important technology developed on Egghead Island wasn't necessarily Punk Records, the Mother Flame, or the Seraphim, because the one that was identified as of paramount importance was the cloud-producing plant, as Vegapunk says. There is one other thing we cannot afford to lose: the cloud plant that produces island clouds. Those clouds might be the foundation of humanity's survival, after all, which is a very unfortunate thing to say because they did in fact lose it. The cloud plant wasn't part of the lava phase that majestically shot up into the air with Punk Records. However, Stella, Shaka, and Pythagoras must have definitely planned for this to be the case. York and the world government currently have control of the original cloud plant. However, a background issue that never got addressed during Egghead Island was the matter of Vegapunk's luggage. During Kizaru's invasion, Jinbei and Sanji were taking care of the, and I quote, so-called luggage to bring with them to leave. And given how they refer to it as so-called luggage, I imagine that Jinbei and Sanji are less than impressed with all of the weird tech it is they had to carry. But what would be worth risking the time to retrieve in the midst of fighting against a Marine Admiral and a Busticle? My guess would be probably stuff that allows you to create another cloud plant, which Vegapunk believes could be the foundation of humanity's survival. And as Civ rather perfectly pointed out in his video, this is just screaming to be built by Franky because the original cloud plant was already shaped like a cola bottle. That is not just inherited will, that is destiny. And even though we do still have Lilith, she surely cannot handle everything alone, and will be in need of a skilled technician, the ones that Atlas was complaining that not enough of exist, but we do have one and he is very super. Although it's very important to note that Franky is not the only person in the world that we can look to for help, because other people I could see being able to handle this technology would be the newly reformed Neomads, which Caesar Clown and Vinsmoke founded to take revenge on Vegapunk. That goal is now no longer possible. And also, we have a much bigger problem to deal with, which is the impending flood of the world. Caesar and Judge aren't the most palatable of people, but I'm sure they do have an interest in their own survival, and would perhaps be willing to work alongside Lilith, maybe a clone Stussy, and perhaps even a potential son of Queen, Franky, to form a full-scale Neomads. Or they could just get Queen himself. I'm sure he's not particularly busy at the moment. Queen and Judge can probably bond over what a prick Sanji is, and there's already a bit of a friendly in. But I do really like the idea of Mads as an organization that was torn apart by its internal politics, coming back together and putting aside their differences in order to manifest the will of their former colleague, Dr. Vegapunk. And going back to Franky, the true focus of this video, his story will not end with the conclusion of One Piece, because the spirit of Tom combined with the skills and technology of Dr. Vegapunk mean that his potential to have an impact on this world is near infinite. And don't forget to check out Civ Retcon, who came up with the foundation of this video. I'm sure there's a lot of other great ideas on that channel as well, so do it if you want. If not, check out another one of my videos, and I'm not complaining.